Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories, here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. The scream that shattered the October silence wasn't human anymore. 3 days later, when Internal Affairs asked me to recount everything that happened in those woods, I couldn't find words for that sound. How do you explain the noise something makes when it's being torn apart not just physically but spiritually? When whatever humanity was left in it finally breaks? But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start with what I thought I knew. I was 8 months into my ranger career at Olympic National Park when Kieran Blackwood vanished into the old-growth forests of the Hoh River Valley. 24 years old, fresh out of training, and absolutely convinced that my textbook knowledge could handle any emergency the wilderness might throw at me. The overconfidence of inexperience is a dangerous thing. It makes you volunteer for cases you should run from. Kieran was 19, a University of Washington photography student who'd come alone to document the ancient trees for his senior project. His roommate called it in when Kieran missed their planned check-in 3 days running. The last anyone heard from him was a text message. Found something incredible. Going deeper into the old growth, signals getting weak. That should have been my first warning. In 8 months on the job, I'd learned that when people say they've found something incredible in the deep woods, they're usually about to become something incredible themselves. Incredibly missing, incredibly dead, or incredibly changed. But I was eager to prove myself. My supervisor, Ranger Morrison, had been giving me the easy assignments since I'd started. Lost day hikers, minor medical emergencies, routine maintenance. This was my chance to show I could handle real ranger work. When he mentioned calling in the experienced search team from Port Angeles, I practically begged him to let me take the lead. "It's probably just a dead cell phone battery," I said, already reaching for my gear. College kid got distracted by his art project and lost track of time. I can find him and have him back by dinner. Morrison's weathered face showed the kind of skepticism that comes from 30 years of watching overconfident rookies learn hard lessons. "Garland, the Hoh backcountry isn't your typical search area. That old growth can swallow people whole. Maybe we should..." "Sir, I've studied every map of this sector. I know the trail systems, the camping regulations, the emergency protocols. This is exactly the kind of case they trained us for." The lie came so easily. They'd trained us for a lot of things at the academy, but they'd never trained us for what lives in the spaces between the trees when darkness falls and human civilization becomes just a memory. Morrison sighed and handed me the case file. "Check in every 2 hours. First sign of trouble, you call for backup. And Garland, don't try to be a hero. Heroes have a habit of becoming casualties out there." I should have listened to that last part. The Hoh River trailhead was nearly empty when I arrived at 3 p.m. October in the Pacific Northwest meant darkness by 5:30, and most day hikers were smart enough to be heading out by now. The few cars in the parking lot belonged to serious backpackers who'd be camping deep in the wilderness for days. Kieran's blue Honda Civic sat in the far corner. A parking permit dated 4 days ago, still visible on the dashboard. I ran the plates through dispatch. Clean registration, no warrants, nothing suspicious. Just a college kid's car that had been sitting too long. I shouldered my pack and started up the trail. The air was thick with that particular Pacific Northwest dampness that seeps through clothing and settles in your bones. Ancient Sitka spruces and western hemlocks rose around me like cathedral pillars, their trunks wider than some houses. In daylight, the old growth was majestic, but there was something different about it today. Something that made my skin crawl. The silence was wrong. In 8 months of patrolling these forests, I'd grown accustomed to the constant backdrop of sound. Birds calling, squirrels chattering, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Today there was nothing. Even the ever-present Olympic marmots were nowhere to be seen. I'd learned in training that animals often flee an area before natural disasters. Earthquakes, avalanches, volcanic activity. But this felt different. This felt like they were running from something that walked upright. 2 miles in, I found Kieran's first campsite. The fire ring was cold, ashes scattered by wind and rain. His tent was gone, but the way the ground was disturbed told a story. Footprints led away from the site, heading deeper into the forest, off the established trail. But there were other prints too. Boot prints that were too large to be Kieran's and too purposeful to be from a casual hiker. I photographed everything and radioed my position to Morrison. Garland to base. Found the subject's initial campsite at mile marker 2. Signs he broke camp and continued deeper into the backcountry, pursuing on foot. Copy that, Garland. Remember your check-in schedule, and stay on established trails. I clipped the radio back to my belt and looked at the line of tracks leading into the unmarked forest. Everything in my training said to call for backup, wait for the experienced team, follow proper search protocols. But I was 24 years old and stupid with the confidence that comes from never having faced real darkness. I followed the tracks. The old-growth forest changed as I moved deeper. The trees grew larger, older, more primordial. Some of the Sitka spruces were over 1,000 years old, their massive trunks creating a canopy so thick that, even at midday, the forest floor existed in perpetual twilight. Moss hung from branches like funeral shrouds, and the air grew thick with the smell of decomposition and ancient earth. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. The tracks were easy to follow at first. Kieran's hiking boots left clear impressions in the soft forest floor, and I could see where he'd stopped to photograph particularly impressive trees. But the other tracks, the larger boots, those followed a different pattern. They shadowed Kieran's path but stayed slightly off to the side, as if someone had been watching him, following him, hunting him. 3 miles from the trail, I found Kieran's second camp. This one told a different story. The tent was still standing, but it had been slashed open from the outside. Camping gear lay scattered in a wide circle, as if it had been thrown in all directions. Kieran's expensive camera lay smashed against a tree trunk, its lens spider-webbed with cracks. But there was no blood. That was what disturbed me most. This looked like the scene of a violent struggle, but there wasn't a single drop of blood anywhere. I keyed the radio. Garland to base. Found the subject's second campsite. Evidence of disturbance, requesting backup units. Static answered me. I tried again. Base, this is Garland. Do you copy? Nothing but white noise and the oppressive silence of the forest. I checked my GPS unit. The signal was weak but functional. I was approximately 4 miles northeast of the main trail, in a section of old growth that rarely saw visitors. My radio should have been able to reach the ranger station from here, but something was interfering with the signal. The smart thing would have been to hike back to higher ground, re-establish communication, and wait for backup. But I could hear something in the distance, a sound that might have been human, a voice calling for help. It was faint, barely audible over the whisper of wind through the ancient trees, but it sounded like someone crying out. Someone in distress. "Kieran," I called out. "Kieran Blackwood." The voice stopped immediately. I waited, listening, but heard nothing except the accelerated beating of my own heart. Then, fainter now, the sound resumed. It was coming from deeper in the forest, from a direction where no established trails existed. Every instinct I had told me to turn back. But somewhere in those woods was a 19-year-old kid who might be injured, might be dying, might be calling for help that I was the only person close enough to provide. I followed the voice. The forest grew darker as I moved deeper into the old growth. The massive trees blocked out more and more light, creating a twilight world where distance became impossible to judge and direction became a matter of faith in my compass. The voice continued to call out at irregular intervals, always just ahead, always just out of clear hearing. "Help," it would cry. Then nothing for 10 or 15 minutes. Then, "Please, someone help me," I called back each time, but the voice never responded to my calls. It just continued its desperate pleas, leading me deeper and deeper into the ancient forest. It took me an hour to realize that the voice was always the same distance away. No matter how quickly I moved toward it, no matter which direction I took, the calls for help remained at the exact same volume, the exact same distance, as if something was staying just ahead of me, leading me somewhere specific. That was when I knew I was being hunted. I stopped moving and forced myself to think clearly. Someone or something was using what sounded like cries for help to lure me deeper into the wilderness, away from trails, away from backup, away from any hope of rescue if things went wrong. But why? And where was Kieran? The answer came to me as the false cries for help suddenly stopped, replaced by a sound that made my blood freeze. Chanting, low rhythmic voices rising and falling in unison, coming from somewhere ahead. Not distress calls, ceremony, ritual. And underneath the human voices, something else. Something that might have been screaming, but was too distorted by distance and terror to be sure. I crept forward as quietly as possible, every survival instinct screaming at me to run. But if Kieran was somewhere ahead, if he was still alive, I might be his only chance. The chanting grew louder as I moved closer. I could make out individual voices now, at least a dozen people, maybe more, and I could smell smoke. Not the clean scent of a campfire, but something acrid and wrong. I crawled the last 100 yards on my hands and knees, using the massive tree trunks for cover. The old growth forest opened into a natural clearing ahead, one I'd never seen on any park map. Ancient spruces formed a perfect circle around an open space, where the canopy had been deliberately cleared to let in the dying afternoon light. What I saw in that clearing still visits my nightmares. They'd built a fire in the center, but it wasn't burning wood. I could see bones in the flames. Animal bones, I told myself, though some looked disturbingly human-sized. Around the fire, 12 figures in dark clothing moved in a slow circle, their chants rising and falling in patterns that seemed to bypass the ears and go straight to the primitive parts of the brain that remembered when humans were prey. But it was what stood outside the circle that made me understand true horror. Kieran Blackwood was alive, but he wasn't human anymore. He hung suspended between two trees, arms stretched wide, secured by ropes that had cut deep grooves into his wrists. His photographer's eye for capturing beauty had been literally removed. Dark, empty sockets wept blood down his cheeks. His mouth had been sewn shut with what looked like sinew, though I could see his throat working as he tried to scream through the gag. But he was still breathing, still aware, still suffering. And standing behind him, one hand resting possessively on Kieran's shoulder, was someone I recognized. Dalton Morse had been a park ranger here for 15 years before he was dismissed 3 years ago. I'd heard the story in whispers around the ranger station. Boundary violations with female visitors, inappropriate conduct, psychological evaluations that found him unsuitable for continued service. But looking at him now, I realized those violations had been just the beginning. Morse had gone native in the worst possible way. His ranger uniform had been replaced by animal skins and bone jewelry. His face was painted with symbols that hurt to look at directly. But his eyes still held the calculating intelligence of someone who knew every trail, every hiding place, every weakness in park security. He was looking directly at me. "Welcome, Ranger Garland," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the clearing. "We've been waiting for you." The chanting stopped. 12 faces turned toward my hiding place, and I realized with growing horror that I recognized some of them. Missing hikers from the past 2 years, people whose cases had gone cold, who had been presumed dead or lost to the wilderness. They weren't dead. They were something worse. "You can come out now," Morse continued conversationally. "There's no point in hiding. We know you followed our calls for help. We know you came alone against protocol because you wanted to prove yourself. We know everything about you, Thea. We've been watching you for months." I tried to key my radio, but my hands were shaking too badly to work the controls. The pack on my back suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "Your radio won't work here," Morse said, as if reading my thoughts. "We've set up signal jammers throughout this section of forest. No GPS, no cell service, no way to call for help. Just you, us, and the old ways." The circle of figures began moving toward my position, not hurrying, just walking with the patience of predators who knew their prey had nowhere to run. I ran anyway. The next hour was pure nightmare. I crashed through the old growth forest like a wounded animal, branches tearing at my uniform, roots catching my boots, the massive trunks creating a maze that seemed to shift and change in the dying light. Behind me, I could hear them following. Not running. They didn't need to run. They knew these woods intimately, knew every game trail and deer path, every fallen log and hidden creek. They were herding me, driving me toward something. I tried to remember my training, tried to think tactically, but terror had reduced my higher brain functions to static. All I could think about was Kieran's empty eye sockets and the way Morse had said my name, like he'd been practicing it. The forest grew darker as full night approached. My flashlight created a narrow cone of visibility, but beyond its reach, the darkness was absolute. I could hear them out there, staying just outside the light, pacing me like wolves. "Thea," one of them called from the darkness. A woman's voice, young, familiar. "Thea, why are you running from us?" I recognized the voice. Sarah Chen, a hiker who'd gone missing 8 months ago, just before I'd started working here. Her case file had been one of the first I'd studied. "We can help you understand," Sarah's voice continued from somewhere in the darkness to my left. "The old ways are better, Thea. No more rules, no more civilized pretending. Just truth." "Just hunger," said another voice from my right. Male, older. I thought it might be Thomas Hartley, missing since last spring. They were surrounding me. I spun in a circle, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but I saw only trees. Ancient, massive, indifferent trees that had stood here when the first humans crossed the land bridge from Asia. They'd seen it all before. The violence, the hunting, the screaming. To them, we were just another species of animal killing each other in the dark. "You volunteered for this case," came Morse's voice from directly ahead. I couldn't see him, but he sounded close, very close. "You wanted to prove yourself. Well, here's your chance, rookie. Let's see what you're really made of." I heard the distinctive whistle thunk of an arrow being loosed from a compound bow. Pain exploded through my left shoulder as the broad head punched through my uniform shirt and into muscle. The impact spun me around, and I stumbled against a massive tree trunk. My flashlight flew from my hand, beam spinning wildly before coming to rest, pointing uselessly at the forest floor. In the sudden darkness, I heard them moving closer. "That's just to slow you down," Morse called cheerfully. "We want this to last. You're going to be special, Thea. The others were just practice, but you're a ranger. You represent everything civilized and orderly and wrong about the world. Breaking you is going to be a religious experience." I pulled the arrow from my shoulder, biting back a scream. The broadhead came free with a wet sound and a fresh wave of agony. Blood soaked through my shirt, but the wound wasn't immediately life-threatening. I'd live long enough for them to do whatever they planned to do, unless I could get out of here. I felt around frantically for my flashlight, fingers closing around the handle just as footsteps approached through the darkness. I clicked it on and immediately wished I hadn't. They stood in a circle around me, maybe 20 feet away at the edge of the light. 12 figures that had once been human, now something else entirely. Their faces were painted with symbols that seemed to move in the flashlight beam, and their eyes reflected the light like an animal's. But Morse wasn't with them. "Where is he?" I whispered. "Right behind you," came his voice from the darkness at my back. I spun around, flashlight beam revealing Morse standing less than 5 feet away. He held a hunting knife in one hand and a coil of rope in the other. But what made my knees go weak wasn't the weapons. It was his smile. It was the smile of someone who genuinely enjoyed his work. "You know what I realized during my 15 years as a ranger?" he said conversationally, as if we were chatting over coffee in the break room. "Civilization is just a thin coat of paint over our real nature. Scratch it a little and underneath we're all just animals. Hungry, violent, predatory animals." He took a step closer. "The Park Service taught us to protect people from the wilderness. But they had it backwards. We should have been protecting the wilderness from people. Until I realized that people are the wilderness. We're the apex predator, Thea. We're what everything else in these woods is afraid of." Another step. "And when you embrace that, when you stop pretending to be civilized, you discover capabilities you never knew you had. Enhanced senses, perfect night vision, the ability to track prey for miles, to smell fear from a quarter-mile away. I backed against the tree trunk behind me, arrow wound throbbing with each heartbeat. You're insane. Am I? Or am I just honest about what we really are? He held up the rope. We're going to find out what you really are, too. Strip away that uniform, that badge, that pretense of authority. Get down to the animal underneath. I still had my service weapon. Park rangers weren't law enforcement, but we carried firearms for dealing with dangerous wildlife. In my 8 months on the job, I'd never drawn it. I drew it now. Step back, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. All of you step back. I'm leaving and you're going to let me go. Morse looked at the pistol and laughed. Actually laughed. Oh, Thea, you sweet, naive child. Do you really think that's going to help you? He whistled, a short, sharp sound. The 12 figures around me moved as one, not toward me but away, melting back into the darkness beyond my flashlight beam. In seconds they were gone, leaving just me and Morse in the small circle of light. You see, the thing about being the apex predator, he said, still smiling, is that you don't hunt alone. You hunt in packs. And right now, my pack is spreading out through these woods surrounding you, cutting off every possible escape route. He was right. I could hear them moving in the darkness, the soft whisper of footsteps on forest floor, the occasional snap of a twig. They were everywhere. So here's what's going to happen, Morse continued. You're going to put down that gun and you're going to come with me. We'll take you back to the clearing, and we'll begin your education. It's going to hurt. Transformation always does. But when it's over, you'll understand. You'll be one of us. And if I don't? His smile widened. Then we'll hunt you through these woods until you collapse from exhaustion, and then we'll drag you back to the clearing anyway. But you'll arrive damaged, broken, less useful for our purposes. The choice is yours. I could feel them out there in the darkness, watching, waiting. 12 predators who had once been hikers and campers and college students, now transformed into something that belonged more to nightmare than nature. But I was still a park ranger. However inexperienced, however terrified, I had taken an oath to protect people in these woods. And maybe, just maybe, Kieran was still alive back in that clearing. I choose option 3, I said, and shot out my own flashlight. Darkness swallowed us instantly, complete and absolute. I heard Morse curse and stumble, and I used the sound to orient myself as I ran. The old-growth forest at night was like moving through a 3-dimensional maze while blindfolded. I crashed into trees, tripped over roots, scraped against bark that felt rough enough to tear skin. Behind me I could hear them crashing through the forest in pursuit, but they were having the same problems I was. Morse had been lying about the enhanced night vision. I ran for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, trying to remember the direction I'd come from, trying to find my way back toward the established trails. My shoulder throbbed where the arrow had torn through muscle, and I could feel blood soaking through my shirt. Every few steps I had to stop and listen for pursuit. They were still following, but they'd spread out, trying to surround me again. I could hear them calling to each other through the darkness, coordinating their search. That's when I realized they were using my name. Thea, came Sarah's voice from somewhere to my left. Thea, you can't run forever. We just want to help you, called another voice from behind me. We want to show you the truth. But worst of all was Morse's voice, seeming to come from everywhere at once. You're only delaying the inevitable, rookie. These woods are our home now. You're just a visitor. I kept moving, hands stretched out in front of me, feeling my way from tree to tree. The ancient spruces were so massive that I could circle around them and change direction without my pursuers realizing it. Slowly, I began to gain distance. Then I saw light ahead. Not electric light, firelight, flickering orange and red through the trees, maybe a quarter-mile away. For a moment I thought I'd somehow circled back to the clearing where they'd held Kieran. But this light was different, smaller, and it was coming from the wrong direction. I moved toward it carefully, trying to make as little noise as possible. The voices of my pursuers grew fainter behind me, and I began to hope that I might actually escape. The light came from a small campfire in a natural clearing much smaller than the ceremonial site. Someone had built a proper wilderness camp here, a small tent, cooking gear, supplies organized with military precision. And sitting beside the fire, calmly cleaning a rifle, was a man I didn't recognize. He looked up as I stumbled into the clearing, and I saw eyes that held the kind of calm competence that comes from serious military training. "You must be Ranger Garland," he said quietly. "I've been waiting for you." I raised my pistol with shaking hands. "Who are you?" "Special Agent Marcus Webb, FBI." He set down the rifle and raised his hands to show they were empty. "I've been tracking Dalton Morse and his group for 8 months. We've been watching you tonight." I have a tactical team positioned around the perimeter of this area. We've been waiting for Morse to make his move." He gestured toward a radio on the ground beside him. "Your supervisor Morrison contacted us when you missed your second check-in. He suspected something was wrong." Relief flooded through me like cold water. "There's a hostage, Kieran Blackwood. They have him in a clearing about a mile from here." Webb nodded grimly. "We know. We've had eyes on their ritual site for 3 hours. The boy is still alive, but barely. We're preparing to move in." "How many of them are there?" "Morse plus 12 others, all missing persons from the past 2 years who have been psychologically conditioned to serve as his hunting pack." Webb stood and shouldered his rifle. "You did good work tonight, Ranger. You led them away from their base, scattered their formation, made them vulnerable." As if summoned by his words, voices echoed through the forest behind us. My pursuers had found my trail again. "Time to go," Webb said. He spoke into a radio headset I hadn't noticed before. "Alpha Team, this is Webb. Package is secure. Initiate operation." The response came through speakers I couldn't see. "Copy that. Moving to secondary positions." Webb turned to me. "Can you travel?" I nodded, though my wounded shoulder was throbbing and I felt lightheaded from blood loss. "What about Kieran?" "Bravo Team is moving on the ritual site now. They'll extract the hostage while we deal with Morse's hunting party." We moved through the forest with Webb leading, using night vision equipment to navigate safely through the darkness. I could hear the sounds of pursuit behind us, but they seemed more distant now. "How long have you been tracking them?" I asked. 8 months. Ever since we connected the disappearances to Morse's dismissal from the Park Service. He was more than just inappropriate with visitors. He was recruiting them, building a cult based on a twisted interpretation of predator-prey relationships. "The missing people? They're not really missing, are they?" Webb's expression was grim. "Some are dead. Others are like what you saw tonight, psychologically broken, remade into extensions of Morse's will. We're hoping some of them can be rehabilitated, but..." He shook his head. "The human mind wasn't designed to come back from what he did to them." We emerged from the tree line into a smaller clearing where 3 other agents waited. They were dressed in full tactical gear, faces painted with camouflage, weapons ready. One of them approached as we arrived. "Status report," Webb said. "Bravo Team has secured the hostage. Victim is alive but needs immediate medical attention. They're evacuating to the trailhead now." Relief flooded through me. Whatever else happened tonight, we'd saved Kieran. "What about Morse?" "Still in the wind. His hunting party scattered when we initiated contact. We've got them contained within a 2-mile radius, but the terrain is making it difficult to..." He was cut off by the distinctive crack of a high-powered rifle from somewhere in the darkness around us. "Contact!" one of the agents shouted, and they all dropped into defensive positions. I found myself pressed against a tree trunk with Webb beside me, his rifle trained on the forest around us. In the distance, I could hear more gunfire and voices shouting tactical commands through radio static. "He's got hunting rifles," Webb said grimly. "Military surplus, probably, and he knows these woods better than we do." Another shot rang out, closer this time. I heard the distinctive whine of a bullet passing overhead. "This is Webb." He spoke into his radio. "Primary target is engaging. Request immediate support at my location." The response was broken by static. Under heavy fire, 3 agents down. Need medic. Webb cursed under his breath. He's picking us off, using the forest as cover, attacking our weakest positions. He's been planning this, I realized. This whole thing, luring me out here, making me follow the voices. He knew you were watching. He wanted to draw you into the woods where he has the advantage. Smart girl. Morse's voice came from the darkness around us, seeming to echo from multiple directions at once. Too bad you figured it out too late. More gunfire erupted from 3 different positions simultaneously. Webb's tactical team returned fire, muzzle flashes lighting up the forest like deadly fireworks. He's got them positioned in a crossfire, Webb said. They're not just random cultists anymore, he's turned them into a coordinated combat unit. What do we do? Webb looked at me with eyes that held the calm acceptance of someone who'd accepted the possibility of dying tonight. We survive long enough for backup to arrive, and we try to take him with us if we can't. He handed me a tactical radio. Channel 7 is linked to the FBI command post. If something happens to me, tell them Morse has military-grade weapons and extensive knowledge of the terrain. They'll need to call in a full SWAT team. The shooting stopped abruptly, leaving a silence that was somehow worse than the gunfire. In the distance, I could hear someone screaming. Whether from pain or madness, I couldn't tell. Webb, came Morse's voice from the darkness. I know you're listening. Here's my offer. Give me the girl, and I'll let your people live. You've seen what we can do. You're outgunned and outmaneuvered. Don't let pride get your men killed. Webb keyed his radio. All units, hold position. Do not, repeat, do not attempt to negotiate. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Morse called back. The girl belongs to us now. She followed our call, she entered our territory, she participated in our hunt. She's already one of us. She just doesn't know it yet. Don't listen to him, Webb whispered to me. It's psychological warfare. He's trying to break your will. But I was listening, and I was remembering the way I'd felt running through the dark forest, the clarity of pure survival instinct, the way fear had stripped away everything civilized and left just the animal need to escape, to live, to kill if necessary. Maybe Morse was right about some things. Maybe we were all just animals pretending to be something more. I can smell your blood, Thea, Morse's voice continued from the darkness. That arrow wound is still bleeding. You're leaving a trail a child could follow. And the fear is coming off you in waves. It's beautiful. A branch snapped somewhere to our left. Webb swung his rifle toward the sound, but there was nothing visible in the darkness. He's moving, Webb whispered, trying to get a better angle. How many men do you have left? I don't know. Radio contact is sporadic. He checked his ammunition. Maybe 6, maybe none. This was supposed to be a simple extraction operation, not a military engagement. Another branch snapped, this time from our right. Then another from behind us. They're surrounding us, I realized. Webb nodded grimly. Classic hunter tactics, Morse trained them well. The silence stretched out, broken only by the whisper of wind through the ancient trees and the distant sound of sirens approaching on the main road miles away. Help was coming, but it might not arrive in time. Thea, came Sarah's voice from the darkness ahead of us. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. We just want you to understand. The old ways are better, cleaner, honest. There's no shame in being prey, added another voice. It's the natural order. Predator and prey, hunter and hunted. Everything else is just pretense. But it was Morse's voice that cut through the darkness like a blade. Last chance, Agent Webb. Give me the girl, or watch your people die one by one. Webb looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that made my blood freeze. He was actually considering it. Don't, I whispered. Whatever you're thinking, don't. I have 6 agents out there, he said quietly. Good people with families. And you're right, Morse has the advantage here. If I can trade 1 life for 6, you can't trust him. He'll kill them anyway. Maybe. But maybe not. And maybe this gives the rest of my team time to regroup, call in more support. He keyed his radio. Morse, this is Webb. Let's talk. Nothing to talk about, came the reply. Send her out and we'll let your people leave. Simple exchange. I grabbed Webb's arm. You know he's lying. You know none of us are walking out of here alive if you give me to him. I know, Webb said sadly, but I have to try to save my people. Before I could stop him, he stood up and called into the darkness. Morse, she comes out unarmed in 30 seconds. Your people better be walking away from mine. They will be, Morse replied, and there was satisfaction in his voice. Send her to the center of the clearing, alone. Webb turned to me. I'm sorry, Ranger. If there was any other way. There is, I said, and shot him. The bullet took him high in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him behind the tree trunk. Not fatal, but enough to keep him down. What the hell? He started to say, but I was already moving. I sprinted across the clearing toward the tree line, firing my pistol randomly into the darkness, not aiming at anything, just making noise, creating chaos, breaking up whatever coordinated attack Morse had planned. She's running! I heard Sarah scream from somewhere to my left. Gunfire erupted all around me as I crashed into the forest. I heard Webb shouting orders into his radio, heard the distant sounds of his tactical team engaging multiple targets, heard Morse roaring with rage and frustration. But mostly I heard my own heartbeat as I ran through the ancient forest, using every trick I'd learned in 8 months of park ranger training to move quietly through terrain. I was finally beginning to understand. I wasn't running away anymore. I was hunting. The thing about being prey is that eventually, if you survive long enough, you learn to think like a predator. You learn to use the hunter's own instincts against them. And predators, even human ones, have one fatal weakness. They expect their prey to run. They never expect prey to turn around and attack. I circled through the darkness, using the massive tree trunks for cover, following the sounds of pursuit. Morse's people were spread out trying to track me, calling to each other through the forest. Big mistake. I found Sarah first. She was crouched behind a fallen log, rifle pointed in the wrong direction, calling softly into the darkness. Thea, we know you're out there. Don't make this harder on yourself. I put my pistol against the back of her head and said, "Drop the rifle." She froze but didn't comply. Thea, you don't understand what you're doing. We're trying to help you. I understand perfectly. I pressed the barrel harder against her skull. You were Sarah Chen, 23 years old, graduate student in ecology. You went missing 8 months ago while researching old-growth ecosystems. That person is dead, Sarah whispered. I'm something better now. Something true. No, you're something broken. I reached around and took the rifle from her hands. But maybe you can be fixed. I zip-tied her hands behind her back using restraints from my duty belt, then used her own shoelaces to secure her to the fallen log. She'd live, but she wouldn't be hunting anyone tonight. 1 down, 11 to go. I moved deeper into the forest, using Sarah's rifle now. The weapon was familiar, a hunting rifle, probably taken from one of their earlier victims. But it was well maintained and accurate, and I'd qualified expert with similar weapons during training. The sounds of pursuit were spreading out as Morse's people realized I wasn't running in a straight line anymore. I could hear Webb's tactical team engaging targets to the east, the sharp crack of professional gunfire mixing with the heavier booms of hunting rifles. But I was hunting alone now, the way park rangers were trained to operate. Self-reliant, adaptive, using knowledge of the terrain and animal behavior to overcome superior numbers. Except now the animals I was tracking walked upright. I found the next one crouched beside a massive spruce trunk, trying to coordinate with the others through a handheld radio. Male, maybe 40, wearing clothes that had once been expensive hiking gear but were now stained with things I didn't want to identify. He never saw me coming. The rifle stock caught him across the temple, dropping him unconscious to the forest floor. I zip-tied him and moved on, leaving him for Webb's people to collect. 2 down. But Morse had noticed the pattern. She's hunting us. His voice echoed through the darkness. The little ranger has grown teeth. Pull back to defensive positions. Don't engage individually. I heard them moving, regrouping, forming a tighter perimeter around what I assumed was Morse's position. Smart tactics, but it meant they were no longer spread out across the forest. It also meant I knew where they were. I climbed. One advantage of working in old-growth forest was that some of these trees were climbable. Their massive trunks scarred with handholds where branches had fallen away over the centuries. I went up a particularly large Sitka spruce, using my ranger training in tree climbing and rope work to reach a position maybe 40 feet off the ground. From up here, I could see the tactical situation clearly. Webb's remaining agents had taken cover in a depression about 200 yards to the east, pinned down by rifle fire from Morse's people. But Morse had made a mistake. He'd concentrated his forces in a tight cluster around what looked like another natural clearing. Classic mistake. Superior position, but no room to maneuver. I had a clear field of fire from the tree. The first shot took down one of Morse's people before they realized where it was coming from. The second shot shattered the radio of another, cutting off their communications. By the third shot, they were scattering, looking for cover, trying to locate my position. But I was already moving, rappelling down the backside of the tree and circling around to a new position. Rangers learned to move through forest canopy when necessary. Sometimes it was the only way to reach trapped hikers or survey inaccessible areas. "She's in the trees!" I heard someone scream. Too late. I was already on the ground again, moving to a new position. I took 2 more of them from ground level, using the massive tree trunks as cover and the rifle's scope to pick targets. Not kill shots. I aimed for legs, shoulders, anything that would disable without killing. These people had been victims once too, even if they were predators now. But Morse himself remained elusive, and I was running out of ammunition. That's when I heard the helicopters. The sound of rotors echoed through the forest, growing louder as aircraft approached from multiple directions. Searchlights began probing through the trees, and loudspeakers crackled to life. "This is FBI Tactical Command. You are surrounded. Lay down your weapons and surrender immediately." I keyed the radio Webb had given me. "This is Ranger Garland. I have multiple suspects down and secured. Primary target is still at large." "Copy that, Ranger. Maintain your position. SWAT teams are deploying now." The forest exploded with activity as federal agents rappelled from helicopters and advanced through the trees with military precision. I could hear Morse's remaining people surrendering one by one, their voices calling out through the darkness. But I couldn't hear Morse himself. I stayed in position, rifle trained on the forest around me, waiting for backup to reach my location. The helicopters had night vision and thermal imaging. If Morse was still in the area, they'd find him. "Ranger Garland," came a voice through my radio. "This is SWAT Team Leader Johnson. We're advancing on your position from the southeast. Don't shoot, we're friendlies." I could see their tactical lights approaching through the trees, professional and coordinated. Real help, finally. That's when Morse made his final play. He came from above, dropping from the tree canopy like some nightmare version of a park ranger, knife gleaming in the helicopter searchlights. I heard him coming at the last second and threw myself sideways, but the blade still caught me across the ribs, opening a line of fire along my left side. We went down together, rolling in the forest debris, fighting for control of the knife. Up close, I could smell the madness on him. Unwashed skin, old blood, the sour reek of someone who'd been living like an animal for too long. "You should have come willingly," he gasped as we struggled. "Would have been easier, cleaner. Now you'll just be meat." The knife was between us, both our hands wrapped around the handle, the blade pointing toward my chest. Morse was stronger, but I was younger, and had the desperate strength that comes from knowing you're about to die. "The old ways," he whispered, spittle flying from his lips. "Red in tooth and claw. Kill or be killed. Eat or be eaten." "You're right," I said, and I bit his throat. Not a nibble, not a warning bite. I sank my teeth into his jugular vein and tore, using every ounce of strength in my jaw muscles. Hot blood flooded my mouth, metallic and revolting, but I held on like the animal he'd tried to make me. Morse screamed and released the knife, both hands going to his torn throat. I rolled away from him, spitting blood, as tactical lights converged on our position. He was still alive when the SWAT team reached us, but barely. They applied pressure bandages and called for a medical helicopter, but we all knew it was too late. Too much blood. Too much damage. As the medics worked on him, Morse's eyes found mine. There was no madness in them now, just the clear awareness of someone who knew they were dying. "You understand now," he whispered through the blood. "What we really are. What you really are." I wiped his blood from my lips and didn't answer. He was dead before the medical helicopter arrived. The cleanup took 3 days. FBI teams scoured the forest, documenting evidence, locating the remains of previous victims, trying to piece together the full scope of what Morse had been doing. 12 of his followers were taken into custody. Some, like Sarah Chen, showed signs of responding to psychiatric treatment. Others were too far gone, their minds broken beyond repair by months or years of psychological conditioning. Kieran Blackwood survived, though he lost his sight permanently. He transferred to a different university, changed his major from photography to psychology, and last I heard was working with cult deprogramming specialists. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital recovering from my wounds, and another month on administrative leave while Internal Affairs investigated the incident. They cleared me of any wrongdoing, called me a hero, recommended me for commendation. I turned down the commendation and requested a transfer. I work at Yellowstone now, in the visitor center, processing permits and answering questions about wildlife safety. Daytime shifts only. I don't go into the backcountry anymore, don't take search and rescue calls, don't volunteer for cases that might keep me in the woods after dark. Because Morse was right about one thing. That night in the Olympic forest, when I was hunting his people through the darkness, when I felt the clarity of pure predator instinct, when I tore his throat open with my teeth, I understood what we really are underneath all the civilized pretense. And I liked it. Sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in my apartment, I catch myself thinking about going back to the woods. Not as a ranger, not as a protector, but as something else. Something that belongs to the darkness between the trees, the old ways as Morse called them, red in tooth and claw. But I don't go. I stay in my safe job, in my safe apartment, surrounded by civilization and electric lights, and the comfortable lie that we're something more than animals. Because the most terrifying thing about that night wasn't what Morse and his followers had become. It was how easily I could become it too. And sometimes, in the deepest part of the night, when the wind sounds like voices calling through ancient trees, I wonder if I already have. "Brennan, you need to get out to the Avalanche Creek Trail. We've got a missing person." The voice of my supervisor, Chief Ranger Patricia Holbrook, crackled through the radio with that familiar edge of controlled urgency. I was sitting in the ranger station, nursing my 3rd cup of coffee and watching the early October darkness swallow the last traces of daylight at barely 5 in the evening. "Copy that, Chief. Details?" Indira Solis, 28, biologist from the University of Montana. She was collecting plant samples for some research project. Last contact was yesterday morning around 1100 hours. Her research partner expected her back at their campsite by 1800. When she didn't show, he waited until this morning to report it. I grabbed my gear bag and started checking my equipment. 8 years of this job had taught me that missing persons in Glacier during late fall were rarely good news. The park's 1,000,000 acres of wilderness could swallow people whole, especially when the temperature dropped and the early snows started. Any idea where she was headed specifically? Trail of the Cedars area, possibly extending into the backcountry near Hidden Lake. Her partner said she was excited about finding some rare moss species that only grows in old-growth areas. I clipped my radio to my belt and shouldered my pack. The familiar weight of emergency supplies, first aid kit, GPS unit, and cold weather gear felt reassuring. "I'm heading out now. ETA about 40 minutes. "Brennan?" Chief Holbrook's voice carried something I hadn't heard before, a hesitation that made my stomach tighten. "Yeah, Chief? This is the 3rd disappearance in that area in the past 2 years. I want you to be extra careful out there. My name is Marlo Brennan, and I am 31 years old. I've been a park ranger at Glacier National Park for 8 years. This happened during the fall of 2023, when the missing person case of Indira Solis turned into something that still haunts me. something that made me question everything I thought I knew about the wilderness I'd dedicated my life to protecting. The drive to the trailhead took me through familiar territory that looked alien in the autumn darkness. My headlights carved through patches of fog that seemed to move with unnatural purpose between the towering cedar and hemlock trees. The temperature had dropped to just above freezing, and I could see my breath fogging in the cabin despite the heater running full blast. I'd been thinking about those other disappearances Chief Holbrook mentioned. 2 years ago, Marcus Webb, an experienced hiker from Seattle, had vanished without a trace near Hidden Lake. We'd found his camp perfectly intact. Tent still zipped, food untouched, no signs of animal interference. His track simply ended at a stream crossing, as if he'd evaporated mid-step. Last year, elderly couple Thomas and Eleanor Pike had disappeared on the same trail system. We'd found Eleanor's jacket hanging neatly on a branch 3 miles from where they'd last been seen, but nothing else. No bodies were ever recovered. The parking area at the trailhead was empty except for a single blue Honda with Montana plates, presumably belonging to Indira's research partner. I pulled up next to it and killed the engine. The silence that settled over me was profound and unsettling. Usually, even in autumn, you could hear the normal sounds of the forest, wind in the branches, the distant call of an owl, maybe the scurrying of small animals through the underbrush. Tonight, there was nothing. I grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight and started down the trail of the cedars. The wooden boardwalk that normally made this an easy walk for tourists now felt treacherous under a thin layer of frost. Each step echoed with a hollow sound that seemed to carry farther than it should have. The ancient cedars towered above me like silent sentinels, their massive trunks disappearing into the darkness beyond my flashlight beam. 20 minutes in, I found the first sign of Indira's presence. A small specimen bag caught on a low branch beside the trail. Inside were samples of what looked like moss and lichen, carefully labeled in neat handwriting. The bag was damp, but not soaked, suggesting it hadn't been there long. I photographed it in place before bagging it as evidence. "This is Ranger Brennan." I radioed back to headquarters. "I've found what appears to be research materials belonging to the missing person, proceeding deeper into the search area." The response came back distorted, filled with static that made Chief Holbrook's voice sound strange and distant. "Copy. Brennan, be advised. Weather, coming in." I tried to respond, but got only dead air. Not unusual in this terrain. The mountains played hell with radio signals. Still, the timing felt wrong. The weather had been clear when I'd left the station. I continued following the trail, using my flashlight to scan for any other signs of Indira's passage. The beam seemed weaker than usual, struggling to penetrate the growing fog that was rolling in from the valley. That's when I heard it. A voice calling from somewhere ahead, faint but unmistakably human. "Help, please. Someone help me." My pulse quickened. After 8 years of search and rescue, you develop an instinct for these situations. The voice sounded female, frightened, and close enough that I should be able to reach it quickly. I picked up my pace, calling out as I moved. "This is Park Ranger Brennan. Keep calling so I can find you." The response came immediately, but from a different direction than before. "Over here, I'm hurt. Please hurry." I stopped dead in my tracks. The voice had come from behind me and to the left, but I was certain the first call had been from ahead and to the right. I swept my flashlight in both directions, seeing nothing but trees and fog. "Keep talking," I shouted. "I'm having trouble locating you." This time, the voice came from directly above me. "Help me. I can't move." Ice ran down my spine. There was no way someone could be calling from the forest canopy 60 feet above my head. I aimed my flashlight upward, the beam getting lost in the thick branches and fog. Nothing. "Ma'am, I need you to keep talking. Are you Indira Solis?" The silence stretched for long minutes. Then impossibly I heard my own voice calling back to me from the darkness. "Ma'am, I need you to keep talking. Are you Indira Solis?" My hands started shaking. In 8 years of ranger work, I'd dealt with lost hikers, medical emergencies, wildlife encounters, and severe weather, but nothing had prepared me for hearing my own words echoed back to me from the empty forest. I forced myself to think rationally. Sound could play tricks in mountain terrain. Echoes, atmospheric conditions, stress. There had to be a logical explanation. I continued down the trail, but now every step felt wrong. The fog was getting thicker, and my flashlight beam seemed to be getting absorbed rather than reflected back. That's when I found the second piece of evidence, Indira's field notebook, lying open on the wooden boardwalk. The pages were covered with detailed botanical sketches and notes, but what caught my attention was the final entry. Day 3, October 15th, 800 hours. Something is wrong with this place. The plant specimens I collected yesterday are gone from my samples bag, but the bag was still sealed. More disturbing, I found several of my research photos scattered along the trail this morning. Photos I know I hadn't printed. They show me sleeping in my tent, taken from outside. David thinks I'm being paranoid, but I'm certain someone or something is watching me. Moving to the hidden lake area today despite his objections. If something happens to me, tell my sister I wasn't careless. I.S. The entry was dated yesterday, but the ink looked fresh, as if it had been written moments ago. I photographed each page carefully, noting that her handwriting became increasingly erratic toward the end, with several words scratched out and rewritten. I tried the radio again. This time I got a response, but it wasn't Chief Holbrook's voice. "Marlowe, can you hear me?" The voice was my father's. My father, who had died in a climbing accident in this same park 12 years ago, when I was still in college. My father, whose last words to me had been an argument about my decision to study forestry instead of following him into civil engineering. "Dad?" The word escaped before I could stop it. "You shouldn't have come here, son. This place, it remembers everyone who's been lost." I dropped the radio, listening to it clatter against the wooden boardwalk. When I picked it up with trembling hands, there was only static. My training told me to turn back, call for backup, report the strange radio interference. But something deeper, maybe the same instinct that had kept me alive in dangerous situations before, told me that Indira was close, and that every minute mattered. I left the main trail and headed into the backcountry, following what looked like disturbed vegetation and occasional broken branches. The fog was so thick now that I could barely see 3 feet ahead. My flashlight had become almost useless, creating more shadows than illumination. The terrain began climbing steeply, and I recognized that I was heading toward the hidden lake area that Chief Holbrook had mentioned. This was old-growth forest with massive cedars and hemlocks that had been standing for centuries. In daylight, it was beautiful. In the current conditions, it felt malevolent. I'd been climbing for about 20 minutes when I heard singing. It was a woman's voice, high and clear, singing what sounded like a lullaby. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, but wrong somehow, as if the notes were just slightly off-key in a way that made my teeth ache. The voice seemed to be coming from a grove of particularly large trees ahead. As I got closer, I could make out words. "Sleep now, weary traveler. Close your eyes and rest. The forest will keep you safe in its loving breast." I'd never heard the song before, but somehow I knew all the words. They echoed in my head as if I'd been singing along. The grove opened into a small clearing, and that's where I found her. Indira Solis was sitting with her back against the largest cedar tree, her eyes closed, a peaceful expression on her face. She was singing, but her lips weren't moving. The sound was coming from somewhere else, somewhere around us. "Indira," I called out, rushing toward her. "Are you hurt?" She didn't respond. As I got closer, I could see that she was breathing, but shallowly, as if in a deep sleep. Her research equipment was scattered around her in a perfect circle, and her clothes were pristine despite having been in the wilderness for over a day. I knelt beside her and checked for injuries. No obvious trauma, normal pulse. But her skin was cold to the touch and she was completely unresponsive to voice or physical stimuli. It was as if she was trapped in some kind of catatonic state. That's when I noticed the trees. Every cedar in the grove was carved with symbols. Deep, intricate patterns that definitely weren't natural and didn't match any Native American petroglyphs I'd studied. The carvings looked ancient, weathered by decades or maybe centuries, but I was certain they hadn't been there the last time I'd patrolled this area. More disturbing was what was carved on the tree directly behind Indira. Names. Dozens of them, stretching up the trunk as far as I could see in the fog. Marcus Webb, 2021. Thomas Pike, 2022. Eleanor Pike, 2022. James Morrison, 2019. Sarah Chen, 2018. The list went on, stretching back years, maybe decades. At the bottom, carved in fresh wood that still wept sap, was a new name. Indira Solis, 2023. And below that, in letters that seemed to shimmer in my flashlight beam, Marlo Brennan, 2023. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was impossible. The carvings couldn't have been made while I was approaching. I would have heard someone working with tools. And my name was already there, as if my fate had been decided before I'd even arrived. I tried to lift Indira, but she was impossibly heavy, as if she'd somehow become part of the tree she was leaning against. When I tried to move her arms, they felt rigid, wooden. The singing was getting louder now, coming from all around the grove. Multiple voices had joined the original melody, creating a harmony that was both beautiful and terrifying. I recognized some of the voices. Marcus Webb's distinctive baritone from the recordings we'd played during his search. Eleanor Pike's wavering soprano from the interview we'd conducted with her husband before they disappeared. And impossibly, I heard my father's voice among them. "This place remembers," the chorus sang. "This place keeps. This place never lets go what it has claimed." I grabbed my radio, desperate to call for backup, but the device felt different in my hands. When I looked down, I was holding a piece of bark carved into the shape of a radio. My flashlight had become a carved wooden handle with no bulb. My GPS was a smooth river stone. Everything I'd brought with me, every piece of technology I'd relied on, had been replaced by forest debris without my noticing. The fog was lifting slightly, and I could see more of the grove. What I'd thought were scattered rocks and fallen logs were actually people, dozens of them, sitting against trees just as Indira was, all with that same peaceful expression, all appearing to be in the same catatonic state. Some of the bodies were obviously recent. I recognized Marcus Webb's distinctive red jacket, the Pike's matching hiking boots. But others looked much older, dressed in clothing styles from decades past, their faces somehow preserved despite the obvious passage of time. They were all singing now, a chorus of the missing and the lost, their voices creating a harmony that seemed to resonate in my bones. I tried to run, but my legs felt sluggish, as if I was moving through thick syrup. Each step was an enormous effort, and I realized with growing horror that I was being drawn back toward the grove despite my attempts to escape. "The forest keeps what it loves," the voices sang. "The forest feeds on what it needs. The forest remembers all who enter." I could feel my own will slipping away, replaced by a strange contentment. The idea of sitting down, of resting against one of those ancient trees, began to seem not just reasonable, but inevitable. My eyelids felt heavy, and the cold that had been biting at my skin was fading into a warm, enveloping embrace. Just as I was about to give in, to let myself sink down into that peaceful oblivion, I heard a new voice, not singing with the others but screaming. A raw, desperate sound that cut through the supernatural harmony like a knife. "Fight it. Don't listen. It's not real." The voice was coming from deeper in the forest beyond the grove. It sounded young, terrified, but fully conscious and aware. The spell broke, just for a moment, and I felt my own will surge back. I forced myself to move, stumbling away from the grove and toward the source of the screaming. Behind me, the singing rose to an angry crescendo, and I could hear movement, the sound of bodies rising from their resting places, beginning to pursue. I crashed through the underbrush, no longer trying to follow any trail, just putting distance between myself and that cursed grove. Branches tore at my clothes and face, and I fell repeatedly on the uneven ground, but I kept moving. The screaming was getting closer. It was definitely a young voice, maybe a teenager, hoarse from shouting but still fighting whatever force had claimed all the others. I found him in another small clearing, but this one felt different, cleaner somehow, as if whatever presence inhabited the grove couldn't fully reach this far. He was maybe 16 years old, dressed in modern hiking gear, backed against a large boulder with a wooden stake in his hands, probably a broken tree branch he'd sharpened. When he saw me, his eyes went wide with a mixture of hope and terror. "Are you real?" he whispered. "Please tell me you're real and not another one of its tricks." "I'm real," I gasped, still trying to catch my breath. "I'm Park Ranger Marlowe Brennan. What's your name?" "Tyler Morrison. I've been hiding here for, I don't know how long. Days, maybe. That thing keeps calling to me, using voices I know. My mom, my dad, my little sister. But I won't go back there. I won't let it take me like it took the others." Morrison. I remembered the name from the tree, James Morrison, 2019. "Are you related to James Morrison?" His face crumpled. "My dad. He brought me here for a camping trip 4 years ago. Said he wanted to show me his favorite spot from when he was a kid. We got separated in the fog, and I heard him calling for help from that grove. But when I found him..." Tyler's voice broke. He was just sitting there, singing with all the others. He looked at me like he didn't know me anymore. "How have you survived out here for 4 years?" "I haven't been here the whole time. It only calls to me during certain times of year, late fall, when the fog gets thick. The rest of the time, I live with my aunt in Kalispell. But every October I feel the pull. I have to come back. I have to try to save him." The implications of what Tyler was telling me were staggering. Some kind of entity or force that could compel people to return, that had been feeding on lost souls for decades. Maybe longer. "We need to get out of here," I said. "I need to call for backup, get a full search and rescue team." "It won't let you leave," Tyler interrupted. "Not once you've seen the grove. Not once you know. The only reason I can resist is because I never let it fully take me that first time. But you were almost gone when I screamed, weren't you?" He was right. I could still feel the pull, a constant tugging at the edges of my consciousness, urging me to return to that peaceful grove, to take my place among the chorus of the lost. "Then how do we fight it?" Tyler held up his makeshift weapon. "Fire. It's the only thing that seems to hurt it. I've been collecting dry wood, trying to build up the courage to..." He gestured vaguely toward the grove. "You want to burn down the forest?" "Not the whole forest, just that grove. Those trees. I think they're what's keeping everyone trapped. My dad, all those people, they're not really dead, but they're not alive either. They're part of it now." The singing was getting closer. Through the fog, I could see shapes moving between the trees, the trapped souls of the grove, being used as extensions of whatever malevolent force had claimed them. They moved in perfect synchronization, their peaceful expressions never changing even as they hunted us. "How much dry wood do you have?" I asked. Tyler led me to a small cache he'd built behind the boulder, maybe enough for a good-sized campfire, but nowhere near enough to threaten a grove of ancient cedars. "There's a maintenance shed about half a mile east of here," I said, remembering the trail maps. "If we can reach it, there should be fuel, maybe some tools we can use." We gathered Tyler's supplies and started moving. The fog was so thick now that we could barely see each other, let alone navigate, but I had to trust my knowledge of the terrain. Behind us, the singing continued, sometimes close, sometimes distant, as our pursuers moved with impossible stealth through the forest. The shed was exactly where I remembered it, a small wooden structure used to store equipment for trail maintenance. The door was locked, but my ranger key still worked. Apparently, whatever force was affecting my other equipment hadn't extended to simple mechanical objects. Inside, we found what we needed: several containers of gasoline for chainsaws and generators, some road flares, and a handful of basic tools. Tyler's eyes lit up when he saw the fuel. "This could work," he said, "if we can get close enough to the grove without being taken." "What exactly are we dealing with here?" I asked as we loaded supplies into my backpack. "What is that thing?" Tyler was quiet for a long moment. "I've had 4 years to think about it, to research. There are stories, old stories from the tribes that lived here before the park was established. They called this area the Dreaming Ground, a place where the spirits of the forest could claim those who wandered too far from the light." "You think it's some kind of ancient spirit?" "I think it's something that's been here much longer than humans. something that feeds on consciousness, on the spark that makes us who we are. It keeps the bodies alive but takes everything else. And it's been growing stronger with each person it claims. We loaded up and prepared to head back. As we left the shed, I tried my radio one more time. To my surprise, I got a clear signal. "This is Ranger Brennan requesting immediate backup at Hidden Lake area. Emergency situation, multiple missing persons, suspect possible." The transmission cut off as my father's voice came through the speaker again. "Marlo, you can't fight this. Come home, son. Come rest with us. The forest is so peaceful when you stop struggling." Tyler grabbed the radio from my hands and smashed it against a tree. "It uses everything you care about against you. Every voice, every memory. The only way to win is to not listen." We made our way back toward the grove, moving slowly and carefully. The singing had stopped, which somehow made everything worse. At least when we could hear them, we knew where our pursuers were. The silence was broken by a new voice, Chief Holbrook calling my name from somewhere ahead. "Brennan, thank God we found you. We've got the whole search team out here." I started to respond, but Tyler grabbed my arm. "It's not her," he whispered. "Listen to how she's breathing." He was right. The voice had no breath sounds between words, no natural pauses or inflections. It was a perfect imitation, but it lacked the subtle imperfections that made speech human. "Brennan, we found the missing woman. She's safe. Just follow my voice." We crept forward, and through the fog I could see a figure in ranger uniform standing at the edge of the grove. It looked exactly like Chief Holbrook, down to her distinctive gray hair and authoritative posture. But when I looked closer, I could see that her feet weren't quite touching the ground. The grove was active now. All of the trapped souls were standing, facing outward, their eyes open but vacant. They were perfectly still, like an army of mannequins waiting for orders. "Now or never," Tyler whispered. We had planned this as carefully as possible. Tyler would create a distraction while I got close enough to douse the largest trees with gasoline. The hope was that the fire would disrupt whatever force was keeping the people trapped, allowing them to escape before the flames spread too far. Tyler stood up and started shouting at the fake Chief Holbrook. "I know what you are. You can't have him. You can't have any of them." The figure turned toward him, and its face began to change, cycling through different appearances. My father, Marcus Webb, people I'd never seen before but somehow recognized as previous victims. Its mouth opened impossibly wide, and the most horrific sound I'd ever heard emerged. Not quite human, not quite animal, but filled with an ancient hunger that made my bones ache. While it was focused on Tyler, I sprinted into the grove. The trapped people didn't react to my presence, but I could feel the pull of whatever force controlled them trying to drag me back into that peaceful stupor. I fought against it, focusing on the weight of the gasoline containers, the mechanical actions of opening caps and pouring fuel. I started with the tree where Indira was sitting, dousing her and the carved symbols with gasoline. She didn't react even when the fuel splashed on her face. I moved to the next tree, then the next, working my way around the grove while Tyler continued his desperate distraction. The entity wearing Chief Holbrook's face was growing larger, more monstrous. Its limbs stretched and twisted, becoming more like tree branches than human arms. Its voice became a chorus of all the people it had claimed, all speaking in perfect unison. "You cannot take them from us. They are ours now. They are part of the eternal song." I had emptied 2 containers and was working on the third when the entity suddenly turned its attention to me. The fake Holbrook face was gone, replaced by something that hurt to look at directly. A shifting mass of features from all of its victims, constantly changing but never quite human. "Marlo Brennan," it said in my father's voice. "You were always so stubborn, just like when you chose forestry over engineering. Always had to do things your own way." The words hit harder than they should have. The old guilt, the regret over our last argument, the years of wondering if I'd chosen my career to honor him or to spite him. It all came rushing back, with devastating force. I stumbled, nearly dropping the gasoline container. The peaceful feeling was returning, stronger than before. It would be so easy to just sit down, to join the eternal chorus, to finally be at peace with my father. That's right, son. Come rest. All is forgiven. Tyler's voice cut through the supernatural influence like a lifeline. It's not him. Your dad would want you to save these people. Don't let it win. I forced myself to keep moving, to keep pouring gasoline. The entity shrieked and began to move toward me, its form becoming more solid and threatening with each step. Light it, I shouted to Tyler. Light it now. He struck a road flare and threw it into the grove. The gasoline ignited with a whoosh that temporarily blinded me. The flames raced along the trails of fuel I'd poured, quickly engulfing the carved trees. The entity's shriek became deafening, a sound like breaking glass mixed with screaming wind. And then something miraculous happened. As the flames reached each trapped person, they began to wake up. Their eyes cleared, their rigid postures relaxed, and they started to move under their own power for the first time in years. Indira was the first to fully awaken. She looked around in confusion, then saw the fire and scrambled away from the tree. What's happening? Where am I? You're safe, I called out, helping her to her feet. We need to get everyone out of here. More people were waking up as the flames spread. Marcus Webb stumbled away from his tree, looking exactly as he had when he disappeared 2 years ago. The Pike couple helped each other stand, their faces filled with confusion, but not fear. But not everyone was waking up. Some of the older victims, the ones who had been trapped for decades, seemed too deeply integrated with the entity to be easily freed. Their forms were becoming more tree-like, bark spreading across their skin as the flames approached. Tyler appeared at my side, his face streaked with soot but filled with desperate hope. My dad? Where's my dad? We found James Morrison near the center of the grove, but he was changing. The bark had spread up his arms and across his chest, and his hair had become thin branches with tiny leaves. When he opened his eyes, they were the deep brown of rich soil. Tyler, he said, his voice rustling like wind through leaves. You shouldn't have come back. It's too late for me. No. Tyler grabbed his father's wooden hand. The fire is working. Fight it, Dad. Come back. James Morrison smiled, and for a moment he looked almost human again. I've been fighting for 4 years, son. I'm tired, but I held on long enough to see you one more time. The entity was weakening as the flames consumed more of the grove, but it wasn't going quietly. It lashed out with tendrils of shadow and malice, trying to reclaim its victims even as they fled. Several of the newly awakened people collapsed, clutching their heads as it tried to drag them back into the chorus. The fire isn't enough, I realized. It's not destroying the source. Tyler looked around frantically, then pointed to the largest tree in the grove, an ancient cedar that dwarfed all the others. Unlike the other trees, this one wasn't carved with names. Instead, its bark was covered with what looked like faces, hundreds of them, all with expressions of peaceful sleep. That's it, he said. That's where it lives. The tree was easily 10 feet in diameter and probably centuries old. It would take more than our small fire to bring it down. But as I watched, I realized that the faces on its bark were moving, shifting position, and some of them were beginning to open their eyes. The entity was retreating into its core, pulling its consciousness back to the source. If we could destroy that tree while it was concentrated there... I need more fuel, I said, and something bigger than road flares. Tyler was already moving, heading for the maintenance shed supplies we'd left at the edge of the grove. He came back with the last container of gasoline and something I hadn't noticed before, an old emergency flare gun that had been hanging on the shed wall. We doused the base of the ancient cedar with the remaining fuel while the awakened victims fled the grove. Some of them, like the Pikes and Marcus Webb, seemed fully restored to their normal selves. Others were clearly going to need medical attention. Years of supernatural captivity had taken a physical toll. But Tyler's father and several others weren't fleeing. They stood at the edge of the grove, watching us with expressions of sad acceptance. We can't leave, James Morrison called out. We've been part of it too long, but you can still escape. Take Tyler and go. Dad, no! Tyler raised the flare gun toward the ancient tree. "I'm not leaving without you." "You already have," his father said softly. "You saved me the moment you refused to give up. You gave me the strength to remember who I was, even when I was becoming something else. That's enough." Tyler's hand was shaking as he aimed the flare gun. I could see the internal struggle on his face, the desperate hope that somehow his father could still be saved, fighting against the growing realization that some transformations couldn't be reversed. The entity spoke one last time, its voice now coming directly from the ancient tree, no longer borrowing the appearances of its victims. "You think you have won, but you have only freed the recent acquisitions. The old ones, the deep ones, they belong to me forever. And I will remember you, Marlowe Brennan. I will remember Tyler Morrison. And someday, when you are old and tired and alone in the forest, I will call to you again." "Go to hell," Tyler whispered, and pulled the trigger. The flare hit the gasoline-soaked bark and exploded in a burst of brilliant red fire. The ancient cedar began to burn, and as it did, the entity's death scream shook the entire grove. Trees swayed, the ground trembled, and the fog that had surrounded us suddenly lifted. The faces on the burning tree writhed and twisted, their mouths opening in silent screams. Some of them began to fade, finally finding peace after decades or centuries of captivity. Others seemed to sink deeper into the bark, becoming part of the tree even as it burned. Tyler's father watched the flames consume the ancient cedar, then looked at his son one last time. "I love you, Tyler. Live your life. Don't let this place haunt you." He walked into the fire and disappeared. The aftermath was chaos. We had to guide 7 confused and traumatized people out of the wilderness, some of whom had been missing for years and couldn't understand how much time had passed. Emergency medical teams were called in. Search and rescue coordinated the largest recovery operation in the park's history. The official report listed it as a freak weather event that had trapped multiple hikers in a dangerous area, causing disorientation and exposure-related trauma. The burned grove was attributed to an accidental campfire that had gotten out of control. Most of the rescued victims had little clear memory of their time in captivity, remembering only vague dreams of singing and peaceful sleep. Tyler Morrison was listed as a survivor of the 2019 disappearance, who had managed to survive in the wilderness for 4 years, an unprecedented feat that made him briefly famous before he disappeared again into anonymity. I was commended for my rescue efforts and given a promotion that I didn't want, but the real truth is something I can never put in an official report, something that changed how I see the wilderness I dedicated my life to protecting. There are places in the deep forest that don't belong to us, places where older things dwell, things that view human consciousness not as something sacred but as a resource to be harvested. We tell ourselves that we understand nature, that we can predict and control and protect it. But sometimes nature looks back at us with hungry eyes. I still work as a ranger at Glacier National Park. I still love the wilderness, still believe in the importance of conservation and protection. But I carry a different kind of awareness now. In the deepest parts of the forest, during the times when the fog rolls in thick and the normal sounds of wildlife go silent, I remember that we are not always the apex predator. Sometimes, we are just another source of food for things that have been here far longer than we have. Tyler sends me a postcard every October 15th, the anniversary of his father's final disappearance. Never a return address, never more than a few words. Still free, still fighting, still remembering. I keep them in my desk drawer, along with the photos of the carved tree and the official reports of the incident. Evidence of something that officially never happened, proof of a truth that can never be told. Last month, a new missing person case came across my desk, a geology student who disappeared near Hidden Lake during a routine field study. Her name was Sarah Chen, and according to her research notes, she was investigating unusual mineral formations in old-growth areas. I drove out to the site yesterday. The grove where we fought the entity is gone, nothing but a circle of charred stumps surrounded by healthy forest. But as I stood there in the failing light, listening to the wind through the trees, I heard something that made my blood freeze, singing. Faint and distant but unmistakably there. A lullaby about weary travelers and eternal rest, performed by a chorus of voices that I almost recognized. I left the area immediately and filed a report recommending that the Hidden Lake region be temporarily closed to public access due to unstable terrain conditions following recent fires. But I know it won't be enough. Whatever we fought that night, whatever we thought we killed, it was older and more resilient than we imagined. We may have destroyed one manifestation of it, freed some of its victims, but the hunger remains. The forest remembers. The forest keeps. And the forest is patient. Last week, I received a call from Chief Holbrook. She wanted to discuss my recommendation to close the Hidden Lake area, but when I arrived at her office, she wasn't there. Her secretary said she'd left an hour earlier for a routine patrol. They found her truck this morning, parked at the Hidden Lake trailhead. Her radio was sitting on the passenger seat, tuned to a frequency that doesn't exist on any of our equipment. When they tried to play back the last transmission, all they heard was singing. I'm writing this now because I know I don't have much time. The pull is getting stronger every day. Every night I dream of walking through fog-shrouded trees toward a grove that shouldn't exist anymore. Every morning I wake up with the taste of wood smoke in my mouth and dirt under my fingernails, even though I haven't left my cabin. Tyler's last postcard arrived 3 days ago. This time it was different. Instead of his usual message of defiance, there were only 2 words written in shaky handwriting. It's calling. If you're reading this, it means something has happened to me. Don't come looking. Don't investigate the disappearances in the Hidden Lake area. Don't try to be a hero. Some things in the wilderness are meant to remain hidden. Some hungers can never be satisfied. And some songs, once heard, will call you back forever. The fog is rolling in outside my window now, thick and unnatural, and I can hear my father's voice calling my name from the tree line. Not the malevolent imitation I encountered that night, but his real voice, warm and forgiving, promising that all our old arguments are forgotten. Tyler was wrong about one thing. You can't fight it forever. Eventually, even the strongest will get worn down by the constant pulling, the endless calling, the promise of peace. I'm going to walk outside now. I'm going to follow that voice into the forest, just like Sarah Chen did, just like Chief Holbrook did, just like so many others before us. But unlike them, I know what's waiting for me. I know that the grove of carved trees is growing again, that new names are being etched into fresh bark, that the ancient hunger is preparing for another feast. Maybe that knowledge will help me resist longer. Maybe I'll be able to warn the next person who stumbles into that cursed place. Or maybe I'll just become another voice in the chorus, singing lullabies to lure the next victim home. The fog is at my door now. I can smell the scent of old-growth cedar and hear the sound of footsteps that don't quite touch the ground. My name is Marlo Brennan, and I am 31 years old. I've been a park ranger at Glacier National Park for 8 years, and I'm about to become something else entirely. If you ever visit Glacier National Park, stay on the marked trails. Don't go out alone when the fog rolls in thick during late autumn nights. And if you hear singing from the deep forest, voices calling you to come and rest to join their eternal chorus, and run as fast and as far as you can. Because the forest remembers everyone who enters, and it never lets go what it has claimed. Marcus, you need to see this. Ranger Thompson's voice crackled through my radio with a tension I rarely heard in his 12 years of service. It was 4:30 p.m. on a Tuesday in October, and the sun was already beginning its premature descent between the giant sequoias of Sequoia National Park. "What do you have, Thompson?" I replied, adjusting my position in the observation tower where I'd been documenting deer migration patterns. "Found the girl's backpack, and Marcus, there's something wrong here. Very wrong. My name is Marcus Delacroix, and I am 42 years old. I've been a park ranger at Sequoia National Park for 12 years. This happened during the fall of 2023, when the missing person case of Luna Whitfield turned into something that still haunts me. Luna Whitfield had disappeared 3 days ago. A 19-year-old photography student from UC Berkeley She'd obtained permission for a solo 2-day hike to photograph the giant sequoias during peak autumn. When she failed to return on schedule, her family triggered a search and rescue operation. "What's your location?" I asked, already climbing down from the tower and checking my equipment. "General Sherman Trail, about 2 kilometers past the South Fork." Marcus, she was heading in the wrong direction. Completely wrong. That made me pause. Luna had submitted a detailed route plan, and I'd personally reviewed the landmarks and reference points with her. She'd seemed competent, prepared. Why would she change her route? "I'm on my way. Don't touch anything until I get there." The radio crackled with static before Thompson's response. "Copy that. And Marcus, bring extra gear. I have a feeling we're going to be here well past dark." As I hiked along the familiar trail carrying my full emergency pack, I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The sequoias around me seemed different today, darker, more silent. Even the usual forest sounds were absent. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush, just the muffled sound of my own footsteps on dead leaves. I found Thompson standing in a small clearing, staring fixedly at a bright blue backpack positioned against the base of a sequoia over 10 feet in diameter. Even from a distance, I could see it matched the brand and color Luna had described in her report. "How long have you been here?" I asked, approaching. "About 20 minutes. Haven't gotten any closer than this." He pointed at the backpack. "But look around it." That's when I saw it. What had initially appeared to be natural shadows cast by the giant trees were actually dark marks in the ground. Not exactly burned, but as if the earth itself had been drained. The patterns formed a kind of irregular circle around the backpack, and within that circle, no vegetation grew. Not even dead leaves had fallen there. "Ever seen anything like this?" Thompson asked. And for the first time in all our years working together, I heard a note of genuine fear in his voice. "No," I replied, pulling gloves from my pack. "But let's find out what we're dealing with." I approached the backpack carefully, documenting everything with my camera. The air inside the circle was visibly colder. I could see my own breath forming small vapor clouds, and there was a strange smell, almost like ozone after a storm, but with an underlying note of decay? No, not exactly. It was something I'd never encountered before. The backpack was intact, the straps still adjusted as if it had been carefully placed there, not dropped or abandoned. I opened the main compartment and found exactly what I expected. Expensive digital camera, extra lenses, batteries, some snacks, nearly full water bottle, detailed area map. "Her camera's here," I told Thompson. "With all the expensive lenses, if someone had attacked her for robbery, they'd take the camera first," he finished. "And look at this." He pointed to a nearby tree. Carved into the bark, about 6 feet from the ground, were marks that looked like scratches, but far too large and too deep to be made by any animal native to the region. And they were too precise, almost decorative. "Bear?" I suggested, knowing it was unlikely. "We don't have bears that make marks like that. And even if we did, why only this tree? Why aren't there other territorial markings?" I keyed my radio to Central Dispatch. "Central, this is Delacroix. We've found evidence of the missing person on General Sherman Trail. I'm going to need a forensic investigation team out here." The response came laden with static. "Negative, Delacroix. Storm approaching, and we have 3 other emergencies in progress. You two need to process the scene and return before nightfall." I looked at Thompson, who shook his head in disapproval. "I don't like this, Marcus. We should have backup." "Neither do I, but orders are orders." I pocketed the radio and grabbed my flashlight, though there was still sufficient daylight. "Let's see if we can follow any trail from here." It was Thompson who found the footprints, or rather, the absence of them. About 30 feet beyond the clearing, Luna's footprints simply stopped. There were no signs of struggle, no drag marks, no indication of where she might have gone. The prints just ended, as if she had vanished into thin air. "This doesn't make sense," Thompson muttered, crouching down to examine the last clear print. "People don't just disappear." But as I studied the area more carefully, I noticed something else. The trees around us, These ancient giants that had stood for over 1,000 years seemed to be watching. I know how that sounds, but there was something in the way the shadows fell, the way the branches seemed to reach toward us, that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Thompson," I said quietly, "how long since you've heard any wildlife?" He paused, tilting his head to listen. The silence was absolute. No insects, no birds, no rustling in the canopy above. In 12 years working in these forests, I'd never experienced such complete quiet. "About an hour," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "since before I found the backpack." The temperature was dropping rapidly as the sun disappeared behind the massive trees. October in the Sierras could be unpredictable, but this felt different. The cold seemed to emanate from the ground itself, seeping through my boots and into my bones. I was about to suggest we head back and return with a full team in the morning when I heard it. A voice, faint and distant, calling from deeper in the forest. "Help, please. Someone help me." Thompson and I froze, staring at each other. The voice was young, female. It could be Luna. "Which direction?" Thompson whispered. I pointed toward a gap between two massive sequoias where the forest floor disappeared into shadow. The voice came again, weaker this time, barely audible above the growing wind. "Please. I'm hurt. Can't move." Every instinct I'd developed in 12 years of ranger work told me this was wrong. The timing, the location, the way the voice seemed to echo from multiple directions at once. But if there was even a chance that Luna was alive and injured... "We call it in first," I said, reaching for my radio. Static. Pure static, with an underlying hum that seemed to vibrate in my chest. "Central, this is Delacroix. Do you copy?" Nothing. "Central, emergency situation. Request immediate backup." The static grew louder, almost deafening, before cutting out entirely. Dead air. Thompson tried his radio with the same result. "Help! Please!" The voice came again, definitely closer now, and I could hear something else underneath it. A wet, rasping sound, like breathing through damaged lungs. "We have to try," Thompson said, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. I nodded, though every fiber of my being screamed against it. "Stay close. Document everything. If this goes bad, we run." We followed the voice deeper into the forest, our flashlight beams cutting weak paths through the gathering darkness. The massive sequoias seemed to close in around us, their trunks forming a maze of shadows and false paths. The temperature continued to drop, and our breath began forming visible clouds in the beam of our lights. "Help! This way. Please." The voice was leading us away from any marked trail, into an area of the park I'd only been to once before, during my first year, when an experienced ranger had warned me about the quiet zones where indigenous peoples had once reported strange occurrences. "Marcus," Thompson whispered, grabbing my arm, "look at the trees." I followed his gaze and felt my blood freeze. The bark of the sequoias around us was covered in the same decorative scratches we'd seen earlier, but these were fresh, so recent that sap was still bleeding from the wounds. And they were everywhere, on every tree, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly. "We need to leave," I said. "Now." But when we turned around, the path we'd followed was gone. Where there had been clear ground between the trees, now there was only solid wall of bark and undergrowth, as if the forest had closed behind us. "That's impossible," Thompson breathed, shining his light in every direction. "We came straight through here." The voice called again, but now it was coming from above us. We looked up into the canopy, 200 feet overhead, and saw something that made my rational mind simply shut down. Luna was there, suspended somehow between the branches, her body twisted at angles that should have been impossible. But she was moving, writhing slowly, and her mouth was opening and closing as if she were trying to speak. No sound came out, but her eyes. Her eyes were looking directly at us, and they were filled with terror. "Jesus Christ," Thompson whispered, and I heard his service weapon clear its holster. That's when we heard the laughter. It came from everywhere and nowhere, a sound like wind through hollow trees but with an unmistakably human quality. It was the sound of something that had once been human, but had become something else entirely. The temperature plummeted another 20 degrees in the span of seconds. Our flashlight beams began to flicker, and in the brief moments of darkness between the flickering, I could see shapes moving between the trees. Tall, impossibly thin shapes that seemed to be made of shadow itself. "The radio," I said, fumbling for my emergency beacon. The emergency frequency. But when I pressed the activation button instead of transmitting our location, the device began playing back our own voices from earlier in the day. Conversations we'd had, words we'd spoken, but twisted and distorted into something malevolent. "What do you have, Thompson?" came my own voice, but wrong, too deep, with an echo that seemed to come from inside my own head. "There's something wrong here. Very wrong." Thompson's voice, but speaking words he'd never said, describing things we'd never seen. The shapes between the trees were getting closer, and I could see that what I'd taken for shadows were actually spaces where reality itself seemed to be absent, holes in the world that my mind couldn't properly process. High above us, Luna's body began to descend, lowering slowly as if being carefully placed by invisible hands. As she came closer, I could see that she was still alive, but her eyes held the blank stare of someone who had seen something so terrible that their mind had simply departed. "Marcus," Thompson said, and his voice was steady despite our circumstances. "I don't think we're dealing with a human predator." The thing that had been laughing began to speak, and its voice was a perfect mimicry of Luna's, but coming from everywhere at once. The trees, the ground, the air itself. "Please help me. I'm lost and I took the wrong trail." I realized with growing horror that this thing, whatever it was, had been using Luna's voice to lure us deeper into the forest. And now it had us exactly where it wanted us. "The stories," I whispered, remembering fragments of conversations with the local Mono Indian tribe members who occasionally worked with the Park Service. The old stories about the devourer of shadows. Thompson looked at me sharply. "What stories?" "Something that feeds on fear, that can twist reality within the forest. The tribal elders said it was bound here, in the deepest parts of the old growth, but that it could reach out, manipulate things, if enough fear was present." Luna's body touched the ground 10 feet away from us, and she stood up with movements that were too fluid, too graceful. When she smiled at us, her teeth were too sharp, and her eyes were completely black. "Thank you for coming to find me," she said in her own voice, but with harmonics underneath it that seemed to resonate in my bones. "I've been so lonely." That's when I understood. Luna wasn't being used as bait. She had become part of whatever this thing was. The real Luna was gone, consumed, and what stood before us was something wearing her appearance like a mask. Thompson raised his weapon, but before he could fire, the not Luna moved with impossible speed, crossing the distance between us in less than a heartbeat. I heard Thompson scream, a sound of pure terror that cut off abruptly, and when I spun around, he was gone. Simply gone. I was alone in the forest with something that had once been a missing college student, and was now something else entirely. "Don't run, Marcus," it said, tilting its head at an angle that would have broken a human neck. "Running only makes the fear stronger, and I'm so very hungry." I did run, crashing through underbrush that tore at my clothes and skin, stumbling over roots and fallen branches in the darkness. My flashlight had died, and the only illumination came from a sickly phosphorescence that seemed to emanate from the bark of the trees themselves. Behind me, I could hear it following, not running, but gliding through the forest with predatory patience. It knew these woods better than I did now, knew every tree and shadow and hidden path. It didn't need to hurry. "Marcus," it called, and now it was using Thompson's voice. "Marcus, where are you? I'm hurt. I need help." I knew it was a lie, but the voice was so perfect, so exactly like my partner's, that for a moment I almost turned back. That's when I stumbled into another clearing, this one larger than where we'd found the backpack. But this clearing was wrong in ways that hurt to perceive. The ground was covered in that same dark, lifeless earth. But here, it formed intricate patterns that seemed to shift and move when I wasn't looking directly at them. And there were others. Bodies, or what had been bodies, arranged in a rough circle around the edge of the clearing. Some were recent, their Park Service uniforms still identifiable. Others were older, reduced to bones and tatters of clothing, but they were all positioned the same way, kneeling as if in worship, their faces turned toward the center of the clearing where something massive and terrible waited. I recognized some of the uniforms, rangers who had disappeared over the years, cases that had been closed as accidents or equipment failures. They hadn't left the park at all. They'd been brought here to feed this thing that wore familiar faces and spoke with trusted voices. "Welcome home, Marcus," the thing said, and now it was using my own voice, speaking words I'd never said. "You've been away so long." It emerged from the tree line, still wearing Luna's face but no longer bothering to maintain human proportions. It was too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent in too many places. Its fingers had become claws, each one longer than my hand, and when it smiled, rows of teeth filled its mouth like a shark's. 12 years you've walked these woods," it continued in my voice. 12 years I've watched you, learned from you, prepared for you. Do you know how long I've been hungry, Marcus? How long since I've had a feast like the one you'll provide?" I understood then why it had waited, why it had taken Thompson first and saved me for last. It wanted the ranger with the most experience, the most deep-seated fear of failure, the most terror of the unknown. It wanted someone whose consumption would sustain it for years to come. My service weapon was in my hand, though I didn't remember drawing it. I fired 3 rounds center mass, the reports echoing through the clearing like thunder. The thing wearing Luna's face staggered back, black ichor spraying from the wounds, but it didn't fall. Instead, it laughed. "Bullets, Marcus? Really? I'm not flesh and blood anymore. I'm fear made manifest, shadow given form. I'm every nightmare you've ever had about losing someone in these woods." The wounds sealed themselves as I watched, the flesh flowing like liquid until there was no trace of damage. But I had one advantage it didn't know about. In my 12 years as a ranger, I'd learned that fear was only as powerful as you allowed it to be, and I'd faced enough real dangers, lost hikers, medical emergencies, natural disasters, to know that panic was the enemy, that survival depended on clear thinking and decisive action. I pulled the emergency flare from my belt and ignited it, filling the clearing with brilliant red light. The thing recoiled, its stolen features writhing as if the light caused physical pain. "Light won't save you," it hissed, but I could hear uncertainty in its voice for the first time. "Maybe not," I said, backing toward what I hoped was the way out of the clearing. "But it'll buy me time." I ran again, holding the flare high, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I could see the forest as it really was. Not the twisted maze of shadows and false paths, but the familiar network of trails I'd walked for over a decade. The thing pursued me, staying just at the edge of the flare's light, but I could sense its frustration. Without darkness to hide and without shadows to manipulate, it was reduced to what it truly was, a parasite that fed on fear and confusion. I made it to the main trail, just as the flare began to sputter and die. Ahead, I could see the distant glow of the ranger station's lights, and I ran toward them with every ounce of strength I had left. Behind me, the thing let out a shriek of rage that shattered branches and sent wildlife fleeing for miles in every direction, but it didn't follow me onto the main trail. Whatever rules bound it to the deep forest, it couldn't venture into areas where too many people traveled, where fear wasn't the dominant emotion. I reached the station at dawn, exhausted and bloodied, carrying Thompson's radio and service weapon along with my own. The other rangers found me collapsed on the front steps, babbling about shadows and missing persons and things that wore familiar faces. The official report listed Thompson as missing, presumed dead in a hiking accident. Luna Whitfield's case was closed, her disappearance attributed to misadventure in difficult terrain. No mention was made of the clearing, or the bodies, or the thing that claimed to be bound to the ancient trees. But I know the truth, and I know that somewhere in the deepest parts of Sequoia National Park, in places where the old-growth forests create pockets of perpetual shadow, something waits with infinite patience for the next lost hiker, the next frightened ranger, the next person foolish enough to follow a familiar voice calling for help in the darkness. I requested a transfer the next month, took a position at a smaller park in Colorado, where the trees are younger and the shadows don't seem quite so deep. But sometimes on quiet nights when the wind moves through the pines just right, I hear Thompson's voice calling my name. And I know that someday, despite all my precautions and all my fear, I'm going to answer. Because the thing in the shadows knows my voice now. It knows my fears, my weaknesses, my deepest terrors. And it's very, very patient. Luna Whitfield was never found. Thompson's body was never recovered. And according to the park's records, I was the only ranger on duty that day. But I know what I saw. I know what happened in those woods. And I know that some hungers are older than civilization, deeper than human understanding, and stronger than any weapon we might bring to bear against them. The devourer of shadows is still out there, waiting in the quiet places where fear echoes longest. And it's still very, very hungry. The search for Luna Whitfield was officially suspended after 2 weeks. Her camera, found in what appeared to be a wildlife cache, contained only corrupted data. Ranger James Thompson was listed as missing in action and presumed dead. His replacement reported no unusual activity in the sector. Ranger Marcus Delacroix transferred to Rocky Mountain National Park 3 weeks later, citing personal reasons. He declined to participate in the official investigation. No other incidents have been reported in that section of Sequoia National Park. Officially,